The communication of photography was originally used as a way for people to discover who they were. But when the Great Depression devastated the nation in 1929, photography became used as a tool to uncover the tragedies in the poor classes and push for reform. Dorothea Lange once said, "The camera is an instrument that teaches people how to see without a camera." By 1850, Americans in every state were fascinated with photographs because it made them question who they were on a national scale and created their new visions of America by bringing back lost communities and creating new ones that altered the cultural landscape. When the stock market crashed on October 29, 1929, millions of investors lost their money, causing spending levels to drop drastically, which led to companies being forced to lay off workers because production was slowed down. This resulted in 15 million Americans being unemployed by 1933. When the livelihoods of the middle and lower classes were destroyed by the Great Depression, agencies such as the Resettlement Administration and the Farm Security Administration were formed to capture photographs of their devastating living conditions and expose the images to the rest of the Americans who didn't suffer from the same circumstances. Roy Stryker and Dorothea Lange used their skills with the camera to communicate the poor ways of life and devastation of these people through their photos in a similar way that Jacob Riis had previously done decades before. Thousands of photographs later, the government finally realized the drastic effects of the economic downfall on American lives and created reform laws to help bring back the economy and people's lives. In 1935, the Resettlement Administration was formed by Congress to aid the poor living in rural areas through President Roosevelt's New Deal. Because the RA knew that the general public did not know what was going on with the lower classes, they established a historical section to issue photographs of the poverty that was the result of the unmanageable land conditions. Instead of distributing data and facts through complicated reports in newspapers, the RA believed that in order to garner sympathy and support for the New Deal, they would need to use pictures because the programs were new, and they also thought that it provided a clear view that showed proof of the unlivable conditions that people suffered in without the interference of too much data. Initially, many Americans did not believe what they saw in the pictures and thought that the images were submersive propaganda, clever disinformation, political agitprop, and false truths meant to promote rumors and brainwash the public with lies. Quite a few congressional critics also questioned the notion of visual information obstructing the photographers from visiting their districts and even debating whether the photos taken were worthy enough to be kept in the Library of Congress 5 years later after the program closed. However, they eventually accepted the truth that the photographs presented and began supporting the New Deal, allowing the FSA to have bigger budgets for assignments. The RA planned to endow low-cost loans to help sharecroppers that were struggling, especially those overlooked by the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. The RA also reconstructed communities for displaced farmers and immigrants, and cleaned polluted areas that had been flooded, and built temporary camps while farms were being relocated to lands with more fertile soil. Later on in 1937, the Farm Security Administration was created to replace the RA. The new historical section was managed by Roy Stryker and focused on publishing thousands of photographs in newspapers and influential photojournalism magazines, including Life and Survey Graphic, all over America. The FSA also continued the work of helping the tenant farmers and providing rehabilitation loans through conservation programs after a second reform law known as the Bankhead-Jones Farm Tenant Act was passed as a result of the work previously done by the RA and continued by the FSA. One of the earlier pioneers of photojournalism was Jacob Riis, who worked individually and went throughout New York with his camera, visiting the tenements, alleys, and air shafts of the slums, and encapsulating the grotesque horrors that he saw along the way. Throughout his career, Riis wrote many books like How the Other Half Lives, Children of the Poor, and The Battle with the Slum, which depicted the things he saw when observing how people lived in the appalling conditions of New York's poorest neighborhoods. He used his work in photographs to push for reform laws to ameliorate the living conditions before the Great Depression occurred and influenced President Roosevelt's reform programs decades later. During his time, Rees changed the way images were used and set forth a motion to use photographs as a way to communicate through media to the public. Roy E. Stryker worked as the administrator of the historical section in the RA and the FSA. Although he wasn't a photographer, he recognized the worth of documenting photographs and their importance in illustrating all aspects of American lives and sought photographers that understood the characteristics of life and had idealistic talents, providing them with salaries, equipment, and psychological support. He used his editorial skills and comprehension of rural life to guide photographers in taking photographs that conveyed emotions like sadness, fear, and devastation, while also portraying the hope and determination of the people. Roy Stryker believed that it was important for the photographers to thoroughly understand their subjects and the surrounding landscape to add detailed elements to their photos that would truly capture the essence of American life during the Depression and influence their audience to feel emotions like compassion. He thought that for those suffering in poverty, photography was like a light at the end of a dark tunnel, giving them hope by pressuring Congress to pass legislation to aid those at the bottom of the economy. In 1935, Dorothea Lange began working for the FSA in California. She believed that it was her duty to make the rest of the Americans comprehend what was happening by communicating the stories of the nation's rural issues. Lange became one of the best FSA photographers because of her incredible ability to capture the emotions of the people during the moment and preserve them using her camera. One of the most famous FSA photographs, known as the Migrant Mother, was taken by Lange in 1936 at a pea pickers camp in Nipomo Valley, California. She had photographed a woman with her children and conveyed the devastation felt by the mother and those at the camp through her visual statement that was full of compassion and sympathy. After the photo was run by the San Francisco News, food and supplies were sent by relief authorities almost immediately to aid those at the camp. In order to successfully help all the destitute families and farmers, many reforms were needed. In 1933, Congress ratified the New Deal, which was the first law passed to help the poor workers, especially those living in rural conditions. The New Deal worked with the Resettlement Administration to rebuild communities and ameliorate the living conditions of the families shown in the photos, like the Migrant Mother. In 1937, the Bankhead-Jones Farm Tenant Act was approved to specifically help farmers relocate to better land and provide them with new equipment because Congress realized through the photos they saw that the farmers were being overlooked and needed their support. The Great Depression changed the communication of photography because rather than communicating what people wanted to be seen as in studios, photographers went all over the nation to communicate the stories of rural life and the poverty of Americans. After the Great Depression ended, photography continued to be used as a way to communicate to the rest of society about things that were going on in the United States and the rest of the world, such as poverty during World War II. Many photographers have continued to impact government policies through their images, including Susan May Salas, a documentary photographer who used her images of the El Mozote massacre in 1981 to pressure the United States Congress into helping those that were affected. Although the battle to gather support for the lower classes was long and challenging, the communication of photography allowed for the rest of America to see what was happening and provide support for those who needed it. Photography was truly vital in helping the poor during the Great Depression because it did what no other form of communication could do by allowing the rest of the nation to see with their own eyes what others were forced to go through in the more rural areas of America, which in turn developed support for President Roosevelt's New Deal, a program meant to support the poor. Roy E. Stryker once said, "Too many times nowadays, the picture is expected to tell the whole story, when in truth there's only one picture in 100,000 that can stand alone as a piece of communication." Through the FSA, the messages sent through pictures were able to be more powerful as a result of the organized communication effort to form legislation that aided society.